everyone, my name is TA and I'm a program officer with Jerome Foundation and I use she, her pronouns. Welcome to the Jerome Foundation's Jerome Hill Artists Fellowship Work Sample Information Session. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, I'm Kristen Marks. I'm a program officer with Jerome Foundation and I use she, her pronouns. The goal of today's session is to provide guidelines and best practices for work samples for your Jerome application that might also apply to other similar application processes and opportunities. Of course, every organization will have unique requirements, so it's important to read thoroughly and respond accordingly to what each application calls for. We will review the what, why, who, and how of work samples, and then dive into Jerome's review criteria and required work samples, as well as work sample formats, guidelines, and best practices. Due to time considerations, we are not going to review the detailed work sample requirements for each artistic field, but we will refer you to where you can find more information and/or encourage you to reach out to us directly with any questions we do not answer today or elsewhere.
Hi, I'm Melissa Levin. I'm also a program officer with Jerome Foundation, and I use she, her pronouns. So let's discuss what work samples are and why we require them. Work samples are your opportunity to represent your generative artistic practice and body of work. We recommend that you submit the strongest work samples that best demonstrate your creative practice. They should demonstrate how you implement your creative ideas and explorations, and they should give a sense of the work that you have created and hope to create in the future. And your work samples should reinforce the information you share throughout your application about you and your work, selecting work samples that align most strongly with your goals. Work samples are typically accompanied by requests for descriptive and contextual information to give staff and panelists additional details about your work and practice. Providing this information is important because it helps reviewers enter into excerpts of your work and understand what they are experiencing. In many cases, as with Jerome, your work sample is a or the central component of an application and likely relates directly to the review criteria. Work samples can be submitted in several formats, typically corresponding to your artistic field. These include video, audio, text, images, and/or a combination of formats. When submitting links to work samples, make sure that you don't move the file until after applications have been reviewed and you've been notified, as this can result in broken links. And if your video or audio files are password protected, make sure you don't change the password. For some review processes, a broken work sample link will disqualify you. However, Jerome staff will reach out to you if we find a link that is not working. Requirements for work samples include requests such as submitting full-length versus excerpted work or completed work versus work in progress, as well as time limits, page limits, guidelines around file or platform types such as YouTube or Vimeo for video, SoundCloud for audio, PDF for text, or requirements for image types or image file sizes. Not adhering to the requirements can result in your application being deemed ineligible. So again, we strongly recommend thoroughly reading and following all guidelines and inquiring directly if you have questions that aren't answered on an organization's website or accompanying materials.
Depending on the type of application process, your work samples will be reviewed by a combination of program staff and or panelists who will have been invited into a selection process by the grantmaker. In many cases, there will be an initial staff review to confirm eligibility and to make sure the links work or the files can be opened. Then access to the applications will be provided to the panelists for the review. At Jerome, review panels are field-specific for all 7 application fields, comprised of arts professionals and artists, including past grantees, with the experience and understanding of Minnesota and New York City early career artists. Panelists' wide-ranging knowledge encompasses a depth and breadth of aesthetics, methodologies, practices and ways of working, and presenting work in various genres, forms, and styles, and an embrace of interdisciplinarity. You can view past Jerome Foundation panelists on the website if you'd like to learn more at jeromefdn.org/panelists. Jerome Foundation has a conflict of interest policy to make sure that your application is not being reviewed by a panelist with a direct conflict. For Jerome, this means someone to whom you're related, a partner or family member, or a close friend, or anyone with whom you have a direct financial relationship.
Work samples are most often experienced online or electronically on personal computers, a laptop or desktop of staff and panelist reviewers. Panelists are often viewing dozens, if not hundreds, of work samples during a designated period ahead of convening as a group. Most panels are now convened over Zoom. This is both due to trends around environmental and economic consciousness preceding COVID, and certainly catalyzed over the recent pandemic years. Work samples will be reviewed according to the guidelines and criteria provided in application with attention to the stated time limits. It is important to think about the viewing experience for the panel if there's anything unique for experiencing your samples. For example, if your video or images are intentionally low contrast and hard to see on screen without adjusting the contrast, or require viewing in a dark room, or if the audio is complex and best experienced through full range headphones, it is important to share these details in the description field for each work sample.
And before we get into work sample requirements, we wanted to share some guidance about selecting work samples for your Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship application. Select work samples that highlight how your creative practice and work aligns with Jerome's review criteria for the fellowship. You will find these criteria in the fellowship guide available on our website, as well as in the application in Submittable. The criteria are creative risk-taking, creative vision, and creative impact and engagement. Work samples are a direct way for panelists to understand your creative expression, and the panel is asked to consider if your work samples are taking creative risks in exploring, expanding, imagining, or reimagining creative practices and experiences, reclaiming or reviving traditional forms in original ways, and or questioning, challenging, or disrupting cultural norms. Panelists will additionally consider if the artist is creating, developing, and presenting imaginative work that is deeply considered, presented with technical skill, is compelling, and offers distinctive vision and authentic voice. And lastly, is the work effective and engaging in its use of structure and aesthetics, providing artistic experiences that communicate unique perspectives and invite viewers to question, discover, and explore new ideas in new ways. The panel will also consider the alignment among all application elements. For example, whether the work samples reflect the information shared in the core question responses and vice versa.
I'm now going to review the specific work sample requirements for Jerome's fellowship. To meet Jerome's requirements, an artist must have work samples that represent 3 different works or bodies of work. 2 samples must be from works or bodies of work created and publicly shared within the last 10 years, which is 2014 to 2024. The third sample must be recently publicly shared work created within the last 3 years, 2021 through 2024, or a work in progress sample that you intend to continue to develop after the application deadline or during the fellowship period. Work samples may not be work created and presented while enrolled in a degree granting program. If work samples do not clearly meet these requirements, your application will not be considered further.
Each work sample must be of generative work, not interpretive work. The applicant must be the generative artist for all submitted samples and have the rights to the work. If you are applying as an individual, you should not submit anything that you have co-created or co-authored with others. If you are applying as 2 collaborators, all work samples must be the creative work generated by both co-applicants. Time and text-based work samples should be the full videos, compositions, or manuscripts with cue points or page sequences. For text, video, and audio samples, we ask that you provide links or PDFs to the full work with specified start and end cue points. This ensures that panelists will see the portions that you feel best represent you and your work. And while panelists are only required to view selected excerpts, they are also given the option of continuing to view beyond the minimum in order to better understand how the work develops over time. You can only provide 1 cue sequence per work, not multiple excerpts within the same sample. If no cue point or page range is provided, panelists will start at the beginning and experience the work for 5 minutes of video or audio or 10 pages per sample. And cue points do not need to be equal for each work. For example, you might indicate 6 minutes for your first work sample and 4 minutes for your second work sample, or 13 pages for one work sample and 7 pages for the other. For all samples, including images, upload them in the order you wish for them to be viewed, keeping in mind that you want to start with your strongest, most compelling work. This might be chronological, reverse chronological, or grouped by body of work, for example. And again, it is important that you submit samples which you feel are the strongest examples of your practice, that demonstrate how you implement your creative ideas and explorations, and give a sense of the kind of work you hope to create in the future.
The following types of work samples are ineligible: promotional videos, trailers, reels, or interviews. Work in which you are a performer, interpreter, translator, but did not generate the work. Commercial or non-commercial work for hire that you generated at the direction of a client, organization, or producer, even if this is commissioned work for which you do not have primary creative control, meaning you don't have the rights to use it. News or journalistic work. The required work samples formats include text, video, audio, images, or some combination of these formats, depending on your selected field. You'll see a chart here with work sample format options by field. Details and work sample requirements for each field can be found in both the application guideline PDF and in the submittable application. Jerome's options for work samples are nuanced because we're attempting to offer options that reflect the range of ways artists are working. There is detailed information, especially for artists who are combining types of samples rather than a cookie cutter approach. Please know that we are here to help if anything is confusing.
For each work sample, we have fields for you to provide descriptions and context. For a work sample description, provide details about the work you're sharing, including the title of the work, the year completed or publicly shared, the location, and the name of a presenting, publishing, exhibiting, or screening organization, or if the work is self-produced. Let us know the length or scale of the work in terms of minutes, pages, or dimensions, and materials or medium. Include any field-specific details. For film, is it a short or a feature length? For dance, is it an evening length or short work? For visual arts, was it presented as a group or solo exhibition? In a separate field in the application, we also ask you to identify your role in the work sample. You should always note your generative role, as well as any additional roles you played in the work. For example, if you are the choreographer and a performer, author and editor, playwright, and actor. And this information should align with what you share in your CV.
The work sample context field in the application provides space for you to give panelists context as they experience your work. In this section of the application, you have the opportunity to give a brief description of the entire piece, provide any important information about the specific section of the work occurring either before or after the work sample sequence, share your intentions and goals in creating the piece, share any notes on why the work might be challenging to experience via computer, draw panelists' attention to specific elements of your work or notes about how best to experience the work sample. In this section, you can point out anything of note about the sample itself. Reviewers especially appreciate artists' candor in sharing any self-assessment about the work sample. An example might be for a choreographer's work sample that is video documentation footage of a performance. This sample best demonstrates my close work with dancers and with live musicians, but there was a problem with the sound feed on the night that we did the video shoot, and you will hear some distortion that is not intentional. This acknowledgement that there are technical issues with the audio recording helps the reviewer note that you are aware of the problem and are working on a solution. This is also where you can share if the panelists are viewing the work itself, such as a film or interactive website, or documentation of a work, such as a video recording of a live dance or theater performance. You can also explain how the work sample format might differ from the live or in-person experience of the work. like if a project is social practice and involves live engagement, if a work is multi-channel and requires special sound equipment, if a work is durational and is intended to be experienced over several hours or days, if the scale of an object is not apparent from the image, or if there are special instructions for reading order in a literary sample. Be as descriptive and upfront as you can so that panelists can be given context and know where and how they might use their imaginations to fill in any gaps.
These are some other insights and best practices that should be more widely applicable to work sample submissions. As we've said a few times, always submit the best or most compelling examples of your work and choose compelling sequences. Again, keeping in mind that panelists are looking at dozens, if not hundreds of work samples in their review, you want to capture their attention immediately. For cue points and page sequences, start at an engaging point rather than a slow build, and avoid credit sequences. Also, select work samples and excerpts that resonate most with the opportunity you're applying for. Provide the best documentation you have available. Documentation of your work can be time-consuming and expensive, and we encourage you to prioritize it as part of your practice if and whenever possible. That being said, panelists are likely to be accustomed to variations in documentation quality, and you can use the descriptive fields in the application to provide additional explanation and context. Get feedback on your work samples prior to submitting your application. Show your work sample to at least one other person for feedback to help determine if your selections are effectively conveying your message and vision. If possible, show the samples to one person who knows your work and one who doesn't. And finally, context is key. Assume the reviewers know nothing about you and your work and offer explanations for elements that are not clearly perceptible in the work samples, such as where and in what contexts and communities is your work being created and presented. Connect the dots for the panel. This is not a place for mystery and intrigue, question marks, and confusion. Clearly describe to the panel what you want them to know about your work. There is no need to provide a full summary, but let the reviewer know what they are entering into. Also, express awareness of how this work sample might illustrate areas of your practice that might need more time and attention, and talk about your strategies for achieving your goals. Take full advantage of all opportunities in the application to make your strongest case to panelists.
Recorded info sessions and a specific info session related to creating your artist CV are available on our website. We have question and answer sessions coming up closer to the deadline. For information on how to attend, go to www.jeromefdn.org/events. Note that the live Q&A sessions will not be recorded.
Finally, we want to let you know how you can reach us. If you have questions about your eligibility or just general questions about the program, we encourage you to make a phone call appointment with program staff. You can also send your questions by email. Our email addresses are listed in the fellowship guide and on our website.
And remember, fellowship applications are due Monday, April 15th, 2024, before 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We want to emphasize that Jerome's deadline is specifically not midnight, and this is so we can be available to support any issues around submission during working hours and before the deadline. Once applications are submitted, they may not be edited or updated, and late applications will not be accepted, and incomplete applications will not be considered. Thank you so much for joining us. We wish you the best with your applications.